But I'm excited to say this is a really good follow-up, I think, from the Electrify Everything panel. You know, there was some things to think about there in terms of how we're going to pay for some of the changes we need to make in terms of electrifying everything. So I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Faith Klareich, who is going to talk about alternative financing mechanisms that are available, different models that can be set up around providing financing for the changes that we all need to make. Faith has a long and distinguished career in studying these types of issues and working in this field, and she's been spending a lot of time researching these alternative financing opportunities. So I'm going to turn it over to Faith to discuss.
Thank you. All right, let me just get a minute to be set up here. Well, it's great to be here with you all today. I'm excited to talk about this topic. I'm going to encourage you to try to stay. I see people leaving, and I think they think financing, oh my gosh, you know, just makes my eyes cross, you know. But I promise you that this presentation is at the primer level. We're not going to get deep into the intricacies of finance here. So let's begin. I have an interesting title. It says, Green, Clean, and Not Mean, but Many. And there's a reason I said that, because we cannot continue to just do onesie-twosie approaches on making green investments. We can't just do showcase projects. We have to do things in a much bigger way, and we have to do a lot more of it. So here's what I think the goal is. You know, we talk about cause and effect a lot, and the effect in this situation is all the recovery monies that we spend when we have flooding, when we have heat waves. And some of that money is spent on the actual problem, right? Fixing the damage. But we also have to remember there are health effects. There are people that end up in a heat wave going to the hospital, seeking doctor care. All of those costs add into what it looks like to recover from one of these climate events, if we have severe storms. And if we think about the fact that storms are going to get more intense and we may have a higher frequency of these events, then think about the money, right? If we project 10, 15, 20 years out into the future, what that amount of money is being spent on recovery, okay? And there are a lot of studies that prove that that's an increasing amount of money if we do nothing or very little. Now, let's look at the other side of that equation, which is if we start investing $1 today in green technologies and we get them deployed and we get them to deploy to a level that really begins to impact that trajectory of storms, and we start to bend that curve, well, actually, even though the initial cost of green technologies typically is higher, we will, in the end, spend less money, okay, than we do if we just continue in the status quo and just focusing on the effect and fixing things. And I want to give an example, if I could. It didn't happen here in Frederick County, but it did happen in Montgomery County, and maybe some of you remember it. We had a derecho storm, which is pretty unusual in this area, and I actually at that time was working in Northern Virginia, had to get back to Montgomery County. Took hours and hours for me to get home. Electricity went down, whatever. I had the opportunity shortly after to go to Glen Echo Park. Now, many of you may be familiar with that park. There was actually a landslide, okay? A huge chunk of land just went down into the Potomac River. Cars went with it. It really was, I mean, it was the first time I saw anything like that sort of up close and personal. Now, it took years to repair and fortify the land so that people could enter the park in a somewhat similar fashion that they did before. But the reality is that park is not what it was 40 years ago, okay? It just doesn't look the same. I mean, the inside part does, but the approach is not. So think about if we have more and more of these events. It's not just a question of what we're going to spend. It's what we're going to lose because we never get it back. Okay, and I'm also proud of this picture because do you know how hard it is to find a picture that gets to roots? So we could talk about dealing with the root causes. So, all right, I apologize for how this template is shown up here, but we've lost some formatting. But here are some of the problems that we need to talk about. You know, I know all of us in this room can talk about climate effects. You wouldn't be here if you couldn't do that. But we really need to focus on those things that impact Frederick County. You know, why is green investing important? Think about a three-legged stool, right? The first leg is, what are our problems here, okay? What are the issues that we're facing? The second leg of that stool is, what are the technologies that can address and provide solutions to those problems? And the third leg, if you're going to get there, is green investing, right? Because you need the money to get those projects into the ground. Okay, that's why it's important. Now, let's focus down on what are some of the things we face here in Frederick. I like to do this little mind exercise. I used to live in Newmarket, and I often found myself driving from Urbana to the farmlands that are behind Linganore High School. Now, when you do that, okay, I found on some of the hottest days of the year that there was a 3 to 4 degree temperature differential. I mean, we're just talking we're not talking a lot of miles apart, right? And that's heat island effect. When you start hardscaping things, okay, you retain heat. Now you could say, well, what can we do about that? You know, we're growing, we have to house people, we have to have businesses. And my point here is there are technologies. There are reflective paving technologies. There's green roofs. There's permeable strategies about parking lots. There are things we can deploy. The thing is, we have to deploy them in a sufficient level to make a difference, okay? And I would venture to say that right now, we're not necessarily doing that to really combat heat island effect that surrounds us and may grow in the county. The other thing I want to talk about is, I don't know if you realize, but since 2010, the county has grown by 21%. That's significant. The last few years, we've grown just under 2% a year. Now, that's more cars, that's more businesses. Now, I'm all for more businesses, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is, those businesses, that transportation, it all takes energy and it takes resource use. So if we continue to have the same energy profile, the same energy mix moving forward, we're just going to be releasing more greenhouse gas emissions, okay? Now, okay, yeah. Also, I now live in Brunswick. And last year, in the summer, one of the hottest days, I guess they had problems making capacity, peak capacity, and we had no electricity for about 6, 8, 9 hours on one of the hottest days of the year. I started calling people. I was like, can we crash at your house? Because my house is getting pretty hot. And I just point that out because even though I know Potomac Electric has said, no, we've dealt with it. We don't expect this happening. We have growth in this county. We have some industries like critical digital infrastructure and warehousing. All those things are going to increase energy demand significantly. And, you know, someone mentioned the grid in this previous presentation and panel discussion. You know, unfortunately, we're part of a grid system that isn't the most progressive. We haven't done the best in terms of moving toward renewables. And while nuclear is clean and it's significant, what is more significant is the coal and the natural gas that our grid system uses to produce electricity. So it outnumbers it's still the majority of what our energy mix is, okay? So what is the future of brownouts? The competition between residential and business growth for this energy? I don't know. It could be a foreshadowing. The other thing I want to mention too is, and this has been proven, I worked in the 90s on one of the first national evaluations of the Weatherization Assistance Program that is run by the Department of Energy. I did that work with Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And ever since that time frame, we know that utility costs, when you're talking about low, moderate, and folks that are close to the poverty line, utility costs can be up to 40% of their income, okay? For most of us, we're talking single digits for us, right? But for others, it's 40%. When you're facing those kinds of choices, do I buy food? Do I bring my child to the doctor? Or do I heat and cool my home, you know, when it's some of the worst weather conditions out there? Those are really tough decisions. But here's the thing. We have the technologies to make a change. We can change those buildings and how much energy they consume. And in doing so, think about the quality of life changes that we bring to those families and residents of Frederick. But, as I said, it takes some green investing to make that happen. I also, you know, I couldn't find this number, and if anybody knows it, share it with me afterwards. I wanted to know what the percentage of Frederick housing and building stock, was over 40 years old. I'm sure that number is very significant, okay? Now, I love historic homes. I think they're great. I'm not arguing against historic homes. But what I am saying is, if they have not had a retrofit in the last 20 or 25 years, they are using technology that is not saving enough energy. Also, it could be technology where they don't have enough air exchanges in their home. So what's the quality of the ventilation system? You know, and if they're using their basements, what's the mold and mildew situation? So now you begin to see why, you know, years ago, decades ago, we used to call it sick buildings, okay? And I still like that terminology, you know. It's hard to get old dogs to do new tricks, but it illustrates what we're facing here, because we have a higher increase in the number of respiratory types of diseases. And I think COVID was the proof, right? When we saw families, you know, maybe 5, 6 members of a family living in an older home, a smaller older home, what was the spread of COVID? How quickly did it spread among those family members? I mean, that should be enough to convince us that these homes need help. But we have the technology. We just need to make the investment. And I would also say that if we have population growth, we have the possibility of burning more fossil fuels if we keep the same fuel mix. Now, others have said it before me today. We have to change fundamentally our fuel mix to be able to change that trend in greenhouse gas emission release, okay? All right, so those are the problems. So let's talk about what green investing does for a typical project. And I'm going to use a retrofit project. Green investing can work with many technologies. The reason I chose a retrofit project is we all either live, work, play in a building. So we all can relate to a building. So that's why I'm going to use most of my examples in the building realm. But there's 3 ways that green investment helps a project become more affordable, right? We have to get over that high initial cost. One is it looks to lower project cost. How does it do that? Well, people have mentioned it. There are rebates, there are incentives, there's tax credits, there's government grants. So if we're talking about green investment being done under a green bank, that green bank has that knowledge and information. It's a repository of what are those possibilities to reduce the cost of the project from the start. The other area it works on, which is very critical right now based on our market conditions, is lowering the cost of capital. Right now, the cost of capital is rising. Interest rates are rising almost every other month. We're getting an interest rate hike. So fighting cost of capital so we can move these projects forward is important, is a critical part of it. The other thing that green investing does is modify the lending terms. What do I mean by that? We can perhaps have longer terms to pay back the loan. That allows the monthly to go down and fit in to whether it's a small business or a home, their monthly cash flow, okay? That can make a difference. We don't always have to qualify people by looking at their credit scores. A green bank can come in, and we'll talk about in a little bit how it does it, but a green bank can work with local lenders and say, look, we're going to help you out in this area, and the quid pro quo is that we want you, instead of looking at credit scores, we want you to look at how have they paid their bills. If they've had a solid track record in paying their utility bills, that's enough for us. Let's consider maybe giving them some green financing. So that's just one example. There's many that can happen. And I just want to give you an idea of what we could do. A couple of years ago, I had a young man, he did the landscaping on my house. And we started talking, and he said, here's what I'd really like to do. I'd like to get rid of my fossil fuel-based equipment. He was using a lot of gas equipment. He said, I'd like to get electric equipment. I thought, oh, he's really onto something. That's great. He didn't know what my background was, and I was like, wow, this is good. I like his thinking. And then he said, you know what? But I have an outbuilding on my property, and I'd love to put solar on that outbuilding. And wouldn't it be great if at night I come back, I plug all my stuff in, it charges, and I'm ready to go in the morning? And I thought, that's wonderful. This guy has really got a great vision for his business. Now, he didn't have that business for that long. So you tell me, could he have gotten all the financing he needed to make his vision happen, even in 2 or 3 years? I doubt it, okay? So therein lies the problem. Now, if he would probably have to do that project in phases, who knows if financially it would end up working out. But if we could put some green investing into that, we could maybe prevent it from being an 8-year project or a 10-year financing-ish thing to something that could happen in a 3 to 5 year time frame, which then allows him to really get it off the ground and take on more work and move that vision forward rather than parsing it out. So and then I just want you to think, how many landscaping businesses are there in this county? And forget about just that. Think about all the other small businesses that are using equipment that's fossil fuel based that could do a similar type of thing. All right, so what are these financing solutions? I'm going to go through them quickly because time is marching on. We talked about credit status. People may not have a good credit history, not because they've done anything bad, just because they haven't been operating their business for that long. They're new. So as I said, we can examine your bill pay history. We can extend your loan term. We could do something like shared energy savings, which I would love to go into, but I have a feeling it'll take up a little too much time. But shared energy savings is what it means. If you save 60% on your energy bill from doing a retrofit, you could finance it by keeping, let's say, 90% of what you used to pay. You'd get maybe 10% savings, but over a period of time, you'd use the rest of that money to pay back the loan. So from a cash flow perspective, nothing's changed for you. In fact, it's gotten a little bit better, but now you've gotten that equipment and working for you, and eventually when the loan's paid off, you get all that savings, okay? Project risk. This is one that I think people sometimes, this is where we get into the intricacies of finance, but I'm not going to keep it at a high level here. A green bank is not a bank where you go and get a checking account or a savings account. It is something that kind of works behind the scenes. Once in a while it works directly with the borrower, but most of the time it's in an indirect role. And one of the things it can do is to partner with local banks. Banks manage their risk by having reserves, okay? And if the green bank comes in and says, look, we'll take up some of your project risk. You don't have to bear all the risk of the portfolio of loans you have. But listen, when we do that for you, we want some things in return. We want you to offer green projects that qualify with enough green technology to lower their interest rate on their loan, or give them a longer term to pay back. There's any number of things that a green bank might say to a local bank when they come in and say, we're going to assume some risk for you. All right. Project size. I think I beat the drum about doing more for small business. Probably comes from the fact that I grew up in a small business. I saw my father try to struggle to get the financing to do some of the things he wanted to do. And, but here again, outside investors are not going to look to do small projects, but if we can bundle them, the federal government did this decades ago, in the 90s even, when they were doing shared energy savings. But we don't have to ignore those projects. There's a solution. We can bundle and we can make the risk more diversified, and when it's a bigger bundle, we can attract investors to come in and support the financing of those projects. And then the other thing that green banks can do is help provide the gap funding that can make the difference between borrowers accepting a project or not. Let's take a look at that, because I think this is really important. I have two bars here. They kind of show what people often sometimes refer to as the capital stack. It's really the components of financing. If we look at the conventional financing side, the top section is reducing the project cost. It's all those subsidies, rebates, tax credits we talked about. The blue part is owner's equity. What is that? Most of us in this room probably have had a mortgage at some point. If you go for a conventional mortgage, the bank will say you have to put 20% down, okay? That's owner's equity, all right? And then you see the third part is the loan, is the debt that has to be served in this financial package. Now, when we're talking green technologies and the initial cost is high, but the operating cost comes down dramatically, but you got to get over that hump. So a conventional financing package usually doesn't address it. Most borrowers will end up backing away. Let's look at the alternative side. Now we have a new box there. We have a new component, and that's the alternative financing. And that is the lower cost capital, okay? Or it's the capital that also allows things to come to either a cash flow that, a financing approach that fits into, the borrower's cash flow issues. So it's a number of solutions. It could be a variety of things. But if you look at that, and you look now that it takes up almost 25%. Now, maybe in this market it won't be that high, but it could take up to 25% of that financing. So let's look at the effect. What's available in terms of incentives and rebates doesn't change. It's the same for both sides. But look at the owner's equity. It almost drops in half. Now, if you're an owner and you only have to put half as much down, that's a big weight off your shoulders. And then look at the conventional financing portion of it. It's also dramatically lower. So the impact of the alternative financing, which is lower cost capital, makes the difference between that project perhaps moving forward or not. Okay? So that's just an overview, trying to simplify this. If you can see on the side, I've just listed some things that can be part of that green financing box. It can be PACE, it could be, from a revolving loan fund, shared energy savings, and that concept of taking on some of the project risk. So what are the challenges a green bank solves? One, we talked about the rising cost of capital. It attempts to address that with offering lower interest rates. It connects local projects to capital. Now think about this. We want to do all this investing. If we can bring investors in that have never operated in Frederick County, so that means we are bringing infusions of new capital into the county to be focused just on trying to get climate-friendly technologies implemented here. Why wouldn't we take that deal? Why wouldn't I do that? And then, what about the fact that it accesses non-traditional investors? What do I mean by that? There are foundations, there are institutional investors, there's private investors, there's all sorts of folks out there, looking to make a difference on global climate. But there are also program administrators. And what do I mean by that? One of the oldest green banks operating in the country is the Connecticut Green Bank. It did such a good job in working with bringing solar to low and moderate income residences and other small businesses that other banks kept saying, can we use those services? Anyway, long story short, they spun it off. And it's called Inclusive Prosperity Capital. It's a nonprofit. It's been offering its services now to many banks and states. And so we can team with a group that is already getting some of this done. So let's go, oh my goodness, look what happened, I don't know why. But I'll interpret for you. So on the first, you could sit there and say, well, I just want to say that it is looking like the Maryland Clean Energy Center will ultimately become a state green bank. You might say, Faith, why do we need our own if we're going to have a state bank? Well, a state bank has to satisfy problems across all the counties in Maryland. That's their mission. So that means that, yeah, maybe there's some things that match up really well with our needs, but there's going to be some things that probably won't. Now, if we have a Frederick County Green Bank, it's looking just at what Frederick County needs in terms of climate technologies and green investing. It's a focal point, right? It's going to concentrate this investing. It's going to do lots of projects, which is what I said in my title. We've got to do lots of projects to make a difference. And it's going to bring new resources into the county. And it's also going to accumulate technical knowledge. It's going to become a repository of technical knowledge, because we have to assess. When people say, I want to use this technology, we have to say, well, does that make sense? Is that a good configuration? Sometimes it won't be. Sometimes it will be. The bank has to offer some opinion on that, right? It has to be able to differentiate good projects from bad. And then it will seek non-traditional investors. Now, right now, under the Infrastructure Act and Build Back Better, there are funds under the Department of Energy and under EPA for seeding green banks at the local level. Okay, it's not always going to be there. We have a unique opportunity. So a green bank could in fact seek those funds. What would it do with those funds? It would then leverage them to attract the outside capital investors, capital and investors that I've been referring to. So So what can be done, and I've given you my personal view of why I think a green bank would be useful, but here's what can be done. We need to do a study, look at the pipeline of projects that would make sense, would be high priority. We need to look at what are those financing options to move those technologies forward. We need to look at what the potential structure of that green bank might look like. I just suggested some things. It doesn't mean that's the way to go. Here's an important thing. We have to make decisions, build or buy decisions, and I don't mean building buildings. I mean, do we start a program fresh from the ground up? Or, as I've said, there are organizations out there already doing this work that will partner with a green bank and use some of the money the green bank has available to work in our community. So we have to look at, based on the problems we have, the technologies we want, do we build or do we buy those programs, okay? What does the capitalization look like, right? How much money do we need initially to get those projects that we will have maybe the best possibility of a success, where we have early adopters, where we can really try to get some momentum before we get to full implementation. So what does that capitalization look like? What are the targeted investors we should be going after? And to go after that federal money, you have to be a nonprofit. So do we use existing nonprofits? Do we have a strategic alliance among nonprofits that already exist? Or do we start a new one, okay? And then, ultimately, you're going to have a business plan to shop to these investors. You're going to need to do a proposal to the federal government. So we also need a roadmap, right? We need an action plan, 2 years, 3 years. I mean, let the study determine that. But these are all the things, we need all this information to go after the monies that are out there to be able to start a green bank. It's possible. It's not an impossible feat. But here's the thing. Even if the study says, you know what, it's not really viable now, there's not enough critical mass. Think about this data. This is the first time we're going to have all this kind of data together in one place. Think about negotiating with a state bank. We're going to know what our position is, what we want from them. We're going to have that information. What about program gaps or starting new programs in the county? We're going to have the information to have a better insight about that. But I do want to just say at this point, government money can't solve it all. It can't. We have to bring in other capital to do what's needed to change that trajectory that I talked about on recovery. So, in summary, what's the bottom line? Green banks can be the catalyst for change. They can accelerate the deployment of clean energy and climate-friendly technologies to reverse the effects of greenhouse emissions, not all of them, but a portion of it, and other non-sustainable practices. We have to look at other things too, emissions, but other things that we do. And the sooner we act to accelerate this investment, the less we spend in the future on recovery from climate impacts, whether it's in our agricultural sector, our business sector, or for our quality of life. So I want to thank you for putting up with me this morning. And I hope I've gotten you to think about, hey, maybe this is part of the solution for Frederick County. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faith.
Yeah.